Bad date stories are always good for a laugh, and it almost feels like it's a rite of passage. But bad doctor appointments, not so much. Whether it's a doctor who rushed your appointment, belittled your symptoms, or hit you with a surprise bill, you shouldn't have to settle for mediocre care. But now, thanks to ZocDoc, you don't have to. You've got options. ZocDoc is a free app and website where you can search and compare high-quality, in-network doctors and click instantly to book an appointment. We're talking about booking in-network appointments with more than 100,000 doctors across every specialty. You can filter for doctors who take your insurance, are located nearby, and are a good fit for any medical need you have. And appointments made through ZocDoc also happen fast, typically within just 24 to 72 hours of booking. You can even score same-day appointments. Stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/female to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/female. ZocDoc.com/female.
Work management platforms. Ugh, endless onboarding, IT bottlenecks, admin requests. But what if things were different?
We found love in an open space.
Monday.com is different. No lengthy onboarding. Beautiful reports in minutes. Custom workflows you can build on your own. Easy to use prompt-free AI. Turns out you can love a work management platform. Monday.com, the first work platform you'll love to use.
Okay, so we're back with Ken and Mike with My Uncle's Escaped Alcatraz. And today we're going to kind of dive into how Alcatraz has become a brand over all these years. And, you know, I mean, it's very famous for a lot of things, but I think the thing that it's most famous for is Ken's uncle's escaping. I think that's what really put it on the international map. That and, you know, the fact that Al Capone was housed there, you know, so those two things. But I think more people, when they think about Alcatraz, I think they think about the escape from Alcatraz, and that, you know, it's a story that probably will live forever, you know, in the annals of Alcatraz history. If Alcatraz doesn't kind of, you know, sink into the bay, which it probably won't because it's on a rock, it's always going to be associated with Clarence and John and Frank Morris, who were able to get off that island in the early 60s and make their way, which we believe, and we have strong beliefs and facts and information that they made it off the island and down to South Mexico first, and then to Brazil, where they lived it out. It was interesting. I was talking to Cindy about this the other day, that because we had something happen with some of the stuff people we were researching down there, and they didn't. Their kind of social media pages have kind of gone away since we started poking around down there. And I wanted to, before we dive into this, I just was curious to get Ken and Mike's viewpoint on this. Do you think your uncles, independent of like going down there and trying to live a quiet life and be farmers, do you think they had any kind of like illegal shit going on down there that they were doing? They had a lot of people working for them. I mean, they kind of, you know, they were on that side of the law with Mickey Cohen and stuff like that.
Right.
And maybe that could be a reason why some people down there don't want to talk to us about it.
Very possible. I mean, you got to remember when they first started out with Fred Breezy and Mickey Cohen, it was all around growing marijuana. They actually started out growing it at their family farm. They're in Ruskin. My granddad caught them. So then you have to kind of wonder, you know, when they did make it down to Brazil, which ultimately was their final destination. I mean, Fred Breezy's still continuing to keep in contact with them, and he's still a drug runner. I mean, even in the early 70s when he was down there, he was running drugs. He was well known for running it out of Colombia. Now, does that mean that he wasn't running some of that out of Brazil, I have no clue. I mean, it's very possible that what they were doing, and maybe that's how they made a lot of their money down there. I mean, you got to think about that farm is out in the middle of the country.
Yeah.
So it's not it wasn't in a location where you had law enforcement that could just come in and say, hey, you know, what are you doing? I mean, they could grow it and it just, you know, no one even know about it. So, yeah, I mean, I could actually see them still doing it at some point. I believe they probably got out of it, and they might have ended it when Fred Breezy got caught in 1976. You know, when he went to prison, that might have pretty much ended the whole process. So I can believe them doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that, you know, I had that thought literally the other day, and I asked Cindy, I go, maybe that's why we're having a hard time connecting with these people. And, you know,
Well, they're probably scared.
Yeah.
I mean, either way, they're probably scared because it's a case that's very well known. I'm sure they were told not to talk to anybody about it. You know,
Well, it's our understanding that, you know, we've talked about this before, that for the first 2 years they're in Mexico, outside Mexico City, on one of Mickey Cohen's farms, which he was growing marijuana, and they had intended to start a farm in Tijuana, but of course that didn't happen, and they tried to rob the bank, and which led them to Alcatraz. And then, of course, we've documented Mickey Cohen's help of getting them off the islands, you know, ferreting them down to Mexico City. Then after a couple of years, you know, landing in Brazil. And when Fred Breezy describes the farm that they had, it was quite a large farm, you know, thousands and thousands of acres. They had a lot of equipment on the farm, a lot of John Deere tractors and backhoes and so forth. They had employed a lot of people, and they sold a lot of their goods in the local market. So where do they get the money for all these things? Where did that all come from? You know, I mean, they did say, again, through Fred Breezy, that they did have some money that Mickey Cohen had given to them. He never gives really the amount, but it's probably a good sum to tide them over for a while, but not enough to buy what they eventually did in Brazil. So something happened between Mexico and Brazil that, you know, the farm that Fred Breezy describes, that provided them with that kind of an income.
Well, also, gangsters don't give money. Those are loans.
right.
It's seed money. It's setup money to
Set up money.
to get
They're
an operation
expecting
going
something
down
in
there.
return.
Right. So most likely they had probably a marijuana farm down in Brazil somewhere, and then later landed where they did, and most likely went legit and lived a nice, quiet, you know, legal life with their family and neighbors. And even if you did have law enforcement looking into what they were doing, you know, with the money that they seem to have, they probably just paid them off, you know, just they were on the payroll just to keep the operation going.
Yeah, I mean, because we know in Colombia, I mean, the cash crop there was the coca leaf and, you know, cocaine and stuff like that. And in the 70s, everything, it was, I mean, it was grown. It's like the government grew it. I mean, it's like they were all complicit, and it was like their cash crop, you know. So I would imagine other parts of South America, it was, whether it was, you know, cocaine or whether it was marijuana, I'm sure it contributed to the local economy. And I think a lot of and like, you know, the laws are pretty lax down there. That's why they went down there, and then no extradition, you know, that's why the Nazis went down there, you know, after World War II.
Well, another thing that Fred Breezy talked about was, at the time when they were there, you know, these are small farming communities, you know, not, you know, small little towns, farms surround the town, you know, and he said there was no law there, that the law didn't exist, that you can basically, if he's squatted on a piece of land for, I think it was a year or something, then
2 years,
2 years, then you can go to the local titles, government agencies, that, you know, you registered the title and it became your land. And he said they sold it for dirt cheap, you know, just nothing really. And then that was yours. And so it was just kind of he kind of described it as the Wild West at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean,
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, anyway.
So, you know, I can definitely see them doing that. I mean, that was their original goal of going to Mexico. Like Mike said, that was their business. That was what they were going to do. And I could definitely see them, whatever they were growing, taking it up to Colombia, where Fred Breezy would, easily fly into. I mean, he was doing that, nonstop, believe it or not, from Ruskin, Florida, all the way to Brazil, to Colombia without stopping. So I can see him that being the point where they would pick up stuff. And I've said this before. Breezy didn't just fly into Colombia and go knock on some drug dealer's door
Right.
and say, "Hey, I need some marijuana."
No.
I mean, this was an operation that was going on, and so believe it or not, we have a name and a number that Breezy and his group were calling in Colombia. His name was Carlos. I don't remember his last name at this minute, but they even have a phone number that they were calling him that was being recorded as the feds were watching this group.
Got it.
So, I mean, they had people, and this was a big operation. So I can definitely see John and Clarence and Frank Morris being a part of this up until the point that I believe the operation fell apart when everybody was busted and a lot of people went to prison.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to kind of float that out there because I was sitting on the couch the other night, and I was like, maybe because when she told me that they scrubbed their accounts, I go, maybe it's because they,
Well, I think it's that, and I also think because they were probably told growing up, don't talk about this to anybody. You get in trouble. You get us all in trouble. Anything to do with the government or law enforcement was very scary to a lot of these people. It's not like here, they grew up under a regime that was very oppressive, and also people would disappear. So it wasn't like the police would come and that would be it, they'd leave. They could take you. I mean, I think it might have been very scary growing up with that secret.
Yeah, I mean, anything south of the border, Mexico, South America. I've only been down there, Mexico, a couple of times. I went down there for a job to cover the Baja 500, and I had to, number one, I had to hire, it was down in Ensenada. I had to hire the mayor of Ensenada's military personal protection guys, bodyguards for us when we were down there. We were also given by the government of Mexico a red card that had nothing written on it, but had a magnetic strip on it because we drove down there from Los Angeles. And they says, if you get stopped by a federale or any cop, you just need to show them this. Otherwise, they're just going to, they're going to arrest you. They're going to confiscate your stuff. And so it's like, and you won't have anything to do, but you can't do anything, as it is. They confiscated a lot of our camera gear. It took us 2 days to get it back. And, we just had to pay somebody off for it. So it's like and you can complain all you want, and people remember the network at the time. Well, we're going to contact the embassy and stuff like that. Don't bother because they're not going to listen.
Yeah, and that was,
just pay them off.
That wasn't that long ago. We're talking about the 60s and the 70s, and Brazil was very there was a lot of stuff going on politically in Brazil at that time, and the people were really oppressed. So if they grew up in the 70s and they grew up with this, I'm sure terrified to talk about anything. So
and I could see if the Anglin family were being harassed by the FBI like they were in the 60s and 70s, I can just imagine what a country like Brazil would do if our government had any sway whatsoever with them and saying, hey, if you got anybody down there who knows anything about these prisoners, we want that information. And so I could see a lot of people not wanting to talk about it. But I could also see, I'm not 100% sure that John and Clarence and or Frank Morris ever shared the complete story with their families either. I mean, I don't, and that might be one of the reasons why you're having people not really kind of say, well, I don't know what you're talking about, because maybe they don't know what we're talking about.
But the fact that they've been visited several times. It's
you would think though that most people down there would remember Three Americans. They would remember the farm. It was a huge farm that had a lot of people employed, and we have photos that we can share. The photos that Fred Breezy took, they should be able to recognize these men.
Yeah. Well,
So
you told me when you were down there, they said that you encountered people saying, yeah, there was Americans here.
we did in
So it's like,
Montreal, Lovato, we did find someone who was around, 70. What would you say, Mike? He was in
He
his
said
late
I think he
70s.
was 10 years old at the time.
Yeah. So, I mean, he remembered them. So surely there's other people. It's not just him.
Yeah.
You just have to find them,
Yeah. Well, anyway, I just wanted to kind of bring that up, but let's get back to why Alcatraz is still in the world's zeitgeist and, all this different types of ideas and stories and fables and, but, I mean, Mike, you sent me this interesting interview with Bob Schibline, Robert Schibline, who was a guard there during.
He was an inmate.
Oh, he was an inmate. I'm sorry, he was an inmate. Alcatraz inmate, and he talks a little bit about the escape, and he has since passed on. He passed away last year, but someone was smart enough to get his interview, and it's on YouTube. And I think let's just play. It's a short interview. It's only about 11 minutes, but be curious to hear what he has to say. And I haven't listened to any of it yet. So
he has a lot of interesting things to say. That he has a direct connection to the escape, and he assisted in the escape, and he was friends with John and Clarence and Frank Morris and Alan West.
Wow!
So he has firsthand knowledge of what they were planning to do. And he didn't just talk about it on this interview. He's talked about it in other venues. So
yeah,
there's actually some information that was not based on this interview, but similar accounts that he gives that they're actually in the book of his participation. So very enlightening what he has to say. Corroborates a lot of information.
Corroborates a lot of stuff you guys found out.
Yes.
That's good. Well, we'll stop and start if I want to stop and ask a question, guys. All right,
Sure.
So here's Bob Schibline.
Yep.
That was fantastic because it was almost like the Navy job said. I was splicing ropes for the barge. They had the big line for hook up the barge with, and the eyes were getting worn, and they had nobody there to splice the eye. And I remember in the Navy how to splice eyes. And so I went to the captain once, and I said, "Your rope here is your lines are getting kind of worn. If we get some rough weather here, they might break. Or you get worn in the edges." And he says, "Do you know how to do it?" I said, "Sure." He's going to lose about 8 feet of rope, but otherwise I can do it. And he said, "Go ahead." So I put all new eyes in, and lots of years and years after that. Anyway, I was pumping out the barge from water. We had a barge over fresh water for drinking and the cooking and everything. And nothing on the island was available for living on. You had to import everything, including water, food, the works, to live there. And
did you know that Amazon has a 50?
Wait, what is he talking about? What barge?
So this. I told Mike that was the first thing that caught my attention when I listened to it. Was he backs up the theory or backs up the information, not theory, that there was rope down at the docks. They kept rope down at the docks. So we've often said how that when John and Clarence and Frank Morris take the raft and position themselves under the dock, waiting for the prison boat to leave, they had to tie up to the prison boat and then tie that onto their raft so that it could be pulled. Well, that just proves right off the bat that one, there is rope available for them if they needed it at the dock. It's something undoubtedly that was common there. So, this could have been something he actually shared with John and Clarence also, other than.
Oh, I'm sure he did.
Because hey guys, there's some rope down there too.
He was fixing the rope for them.
Correct. And so who's to say that, he didn't actually, help out and providing them with, okay, you've got some rope that's positioned right over here, and it's going to be there until I get rid of it. So, it's amazing the amount of tools that John and Clarence and Frank Morris had access to, and he's the rope being one of them.
in reference to the barge, he was just talking about how everything had to be shipped to the island.
Yeah.
There were regular transports going every day back and forth, water, food, medicine, guards, prisoners, dignitaries, whatever. It all had to be brought there. If you see pictures of Alcatraz now, you see the huge water tower, that fed the whole island,
Right.
because they're surrounded by salt water. So how are you going to get all those materials unless you bring them? So he just was describing the barge that would do that.
Cool. All right, let's see what else he says. I got past the commercial. Oh, hold on.
Whatever food came in on the docks, and the forklift driver would pick it up and take it over to the ramp, and we ran it through the X-ray. At point in time is when the escapees were getting close to getting out. And I thought, well, now is the time for them to have the tide tables. And I started looking at the buoys out there when they were moving and when they were sitting idle to know when the tides were coming in and going up, because we had no watches or nothing like this. But then I seen one time, one of my jobs was to gas up the trucks, the vehicles on the island as a dock worker, and cleaning out the office, the dock office, clean waste baskets, tossed out and all that stuff. And I went in there one time and I seen this dock guard eating his lunch. He opened up his lunch bucket and took a newspaper out, which was illegal. I didn't know this at the time, but I knew we couldn't have newspapers, and I was surprised to see him with one. Come to find out, he wasn't supposed to have it either. So he read the paper, and I looked at it, and I left, and I dumped the basket and left, and then came back later on. And the dock's right in the middle, the office right in the middle of the dock. And the only one that can't see you is the guard tower. He can look down, but you're inside the office. He can't see you, what you're doing in there. And to me, I was in there cleaning the office up. I could get in the office, open his lunch bucket, which was up on the shelf then. The food was all gone, but the newspaper was still there. So I could take the paper out and open it. There's a San Francisco Chronicle. And I could open up to the tide tables, open up tide tub, and jot down when they were coming in, when they were going out for the day, and take them up to the Anglin and give it to them on the weekend. Now, the only one I would give it to was Clarence. He was a friend of mine. I didn't trust John, his brother. I didn't even care for John. Alan West, I didn't like at all. And Frank Morris and I were arguing all the time. If he come up with a plot, if he didn't have the idea, it wasn't worth a shit. No matter what I told him, if he didn't think of it, he wasn't going to do it. And there was lots of stuff I could tell him what the tide and stuff, but he wouldn't listen to me. If he didn't have the idea, it wasn't worth writing done.
That's really interesting there. We got a little color of their personality.
Mm-hmm.
and loved Clarence, didn't like John. Mike Morris,
and that's a little shocking because I've always heard from my mom, John was always the one that people got along with. He was the person that was very, he would crack a joke. He was everyone's best friend. And that's really kind of shocking that he felt that way about John.
Yeah. But the tide timetables is pretty interesting how he was able to get that stuff. It's an interesting way. It's like how else he's right. I didn't know that they couldn't have newspapers.
Right. So how else would they get the tide tables?
And that
there was no cell phones, there was no internet. You couldn't just get the tide tables, you had to get them from the newspaper. They used to print them in the newspaper.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah, so it's interesting.
Newspapers, for those of you that don't know, were papers that were delivered to our houses every day that told the news and gave the tide tables and the weather and the astrology for the day.
And the sports. Don't forget the sports.
Oh, and sports and politics and all the stuff.
Yeah. So
and a comic strip.
Oh, and the comics.
Yeah. Well, and it's very easy to limit information on the island, of course, because they are obviously isolated. And so for some reason, the administration didn't want them to have outside information. And in the Clint Eastwood movie, I forget the actor's name, but the one who portrays the warden tells Frank Morris that, we control the information. We tell you what you need to know. And if you don't need to know it, we won't tell it to you. You're basically locked out of the outside world. your only reality is Alcatraz now. I mean, they did have a library, they did have magazines and books they could read, but daily news seemed to be forbidden. And then they even had radios in their cells, but it was only certain stations. Most of them were music based.
And
they could
sports.
listen, and they could listen to sports. They said John actually writes in one of his letters that in the election, Kennedy's election, they were able to listen to the results. They gave him like special permission to listen to the results of the election between Kennedy and Nixon. But that was an exception to the rule of, because obviously it was well known there was a national election, so that wasn't secret information that they didn't want him to have. So, but yeah, they were, I don't know why that was an issue for them, but they were very clear about not letting them have what was going on in the outside world.
So that guard was bringing contraband onto the island.
He was breaking the rules. Now he was on the dock, so he probably figured, it's like no one's ever going to see this.
Me?
Right.
He just,
this guy saw him. This guy saw him.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Can I go back to this guy?
So when he got this raft being made, he told me about the raft. And I said, how do you know you haven't been able to test it? You're making it above the sub block. And you're doing all the gluing and sewing and everything. And the only time it's going to be tested is when you throw it in the water and jump on it to go away. Now, how do you know it's going to hold air? It's going to leak. There's no way to test it until you do this. So how you're going to die? There's no two ways about it. When that raft hits the cold water, that seal is going to be bouncing around with 4 bodies on it, splashing around. The current's going to be tossing around, and the water comes to be about 54 degrees or less. And what is it going to do to all these glued seals? If it comes open, you're going to drop it in the water and die. There's no two ways about it. And after about 2 or 3 weeks of this talk with my end, Alan West didn't make it out that night. And I often wondered if it was my talk or if he actually had trouble with his cell, because the cell was open when they checked it out. And he says after they left, he got through and he went to the roof, but they were gone already. And without anybody being around, he couldn't go, so he came back down and went back to his cell. Now, this may be true.
I knew that I wasn't in good health. Then when
So, something here. He's right. They never had an opportunity that we know of to inflate this raft and to test it. They never had the access to the water, which though kind of brings up a question, because they had a perfectly good raft already completed. And at the very last minute, last few weeks, they changed the design of the raft and they built another one. So now they have 2 rafts. Now, the raft that we know that they left behind, because the FBI tested, they took the raft, filled it full of air. It's documented in the FBI. They talk about how the skill that whoever built the raft was. They never said who built it, but they put the weights on it and it lasted for hours. And they said that it could easily have been maintained by simply blowing into the tube that we believe John was the one, according to West, who built it. John put on the first one, he put a wooden one, and you could blow into it and then clip it off with a clip, and it would hold the air in. It's the exact same way how they constructed all of the life preservers. And they found a couple of those and they tested those, same thing. So you come back around to, how did they know it was going to work? Well, it would not surprise me one bit if it's something that John and them had not done when they were kids. A lot of the process that they used in this escape, tying up to the back of a boat,
getting towed,
putting dummy heads in the bed. These are things that they had done before. It wasn't like something new. Because you could say the same thing about the dummy heads, right? How did you know that was going to work?
They already did the R&D. They already did the R&D.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the things that also came out in the FBI report was Frank Morris. He was a reader, and he had magazines in his cell after the escape that they had found, and they have a record of all the magazines that he would get out from the library, or he would purchase. He purchased some himself. And there was one in particular that talked about vulcanizing rubber. Mm-hmm. And you need a heat source for that, so they, because Robert Schibline talks about how they sewed and glued, and they got the glue most likely from Wes because he was a handyman who could, walk around the prison.
Has he talked about that yet, or is he about to talk about that?
No, he did talk about that. He talked about sewing and gluing. And he was concerned that when you put it in the cold water, that the seams would not hold. They would contract because of the cold. Well, they had sealed it because on top of the cell block, which he also knew that was their work area. He references where their stuff was on top of the cell block, which is exactly where it was. There's we have a photograph of it in the book that the FBI took after the escape, and you see all the materials and the equipment that they used to fashion everything. That there was also hot water pipes on top of the cell block. So that was their heat source to vulcanize the rubber. And Frank Morris knew how to do that because of the magazine.
Interesting. Okay, let's see what else he has to say here. Halfway through it.
When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. They're the home of the #1 checkout on the planet and the not-so-secret Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales happening. So if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds and Skims use. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/start selling, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/start selling to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/start selling. When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. They're the home of the #1 checkout on the planet and the not-so-secret Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales happening. So if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds and Skims use. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/crimes, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/crimes to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/crimes.
If my talk didn't have something to do with it. Anyway, the last side tables I was able to get was the Friday before they left. Monday morning, when I went down to work, I wasn't able to get anywhere near that office. And Monday night is when they left. And I knew they were going to go because Sunday they were out in the yard saying goodbye to everybody openly, saying goodbye and wish us luck. We're leaving. And they were out on saying goodbye to everybody. So Monday, I wasn't able to get anywhere near the tide tables. So the last table they had was Friday. But the tides don't move that much, just a few minutes per day. So they had a pretty good idea when the tides were coming in and when they were changing and going out. But Morris came up to me out in the yard Sunday, and he said, I know you're getting us the tide tables. I want you to know we appreciate it. But I also want you to know that when we get to the water, we're not waiting for any tide to move to come in or out. We're going to go then. And I said, you realize what you're saying? 40 minutes might be a main difference between making it and drowning. And he said, no, we're going to go then because I hate to be busted at the water and not go in the water. And I understood what he was saying, but that sure was stupid to me. Anyway,
pause it right there.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So that to me is very interesting that Frank Morris went out of his way to tell Schibline, we don't need the tide information. Because obviously our belief is they didn't need the tide information because they were being towed out into the middle of the bay. They might have needed a little bit of, when they're in the middle of the bay, you know, which way is the water going? Is it coming in or going out, to know how hard it was going to be for them to, once they released the transport boat from the prison, and to rendezvous with the boat that Cohen had set up. You know, was going to be an easy paddle or a hard paddle, depending on which direction the tides were going. But for Schibline, he was thinking, you know, are they going to go to San Francisco? Are they going to go to Angel Island, possibly Treasure Island? They need that information, or they're going to be pulled out into the Pacific Ocean if they don't know which way the tides are going. And Morris is telling them, we don't need it. That's not important to us. We have other things that we're focusing on. He didn't say what it was. He didn't tell them about the boat.
Right.
I mean, them saying goodbye in the yard is kind of, it just,
and that's another kind of interesting thing too. So if you're, Sunday, they're in the yard undoubtedly because that's where everybody's at, and they're talking to people and they're telling everybody goodbye. We're going to be leaving tomorrow night. Why didn't they leave that night? Why didn't they leave Sunday night? I mean, why would you go, oh, we're ready to go, but we're going to give it one more night? And I've often thought about, if there really is, and we know that there was, a boat that was waiting for them out in between San Francisco and the island, Sunday would have been the perfect time to set up on those steps, because you can see the bay, you can see all the way over in San Francisco. That would have been the perfect time for Mickey Cohen and them to all be sitting there, and that boat come by, or that boat is already out there. And so it then becomes this is where we're going to be at. Maybe it came by, I don't know. But for them, for some reason, to go, we're not going to leave tonight. I mean, why wouldn't they leave Sunday night? Why wouldn't you leave them? If you were ready to go, why not leave them? Why give it another day? I mean, all you're doing is inviting the possibility that one of the guards could see something, I mean, if you're ready to go, why not leave?
They had
I don't really understand what it had to do with Monday night.
Right.
Yeah.
Unless Mickey Cohen had told them, this is the night that it's going to be there. You have to go Monday night.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that makes sense.
They had it dialed in.
Yeah, because even, Wes talks about that when Frank Morris got out of the back of the cell that night, he went up to the roof or to the top of the cell house to finish the boat. They hadn't even finished the boat yet. They still had something to do to it. So here you are on a Sunday telling people you're leaving, and you're going to wait one more night, and you haven't even finished the raft yet. So he's up there completing it, and then they leave. It's like there was something about Monday night that was important for them to leave.
I just find it amazing that they're just kind of saying goodbye to everybody and letting everybody know. I mean, or just a tight circle. I mean, I would be telling anybody anything.
No.
But I guess back then, that's what a stranglehold, whether it's Mickey Cohen or Whitey Bulger or Bumpy Johnson had on everybody in there. So anybody talks, you're gonna be sleeping in the bay.
Well, you had think about this. You had three main mobster characters all together at the same time, working for a common good, which was to get three men off of that island and to escape. And everybody had a vested interest in it. The African-American people wanted off the island because they didn't have any type of representation from any lawyer. They were pretty much, thrown to the side. Yeah. And then you had Mickey Cohen, who wanted to, if he could, stick a knife in the back of the Kennedy brothers.
Yeah,
so he loved doing this. And then, of course, you had Whitey Bulger, who is just, he just wanted to cause trouble. So, I mean, but all three of those had the ability, like you said, to bring the pressure down on an ordinary prisoner to say, you will not say anything.
Exactly.
This is for everybody's good.
Exactly. It was just, everyone wanted it to happen. I
even asked Whitey in one of the letters, right after I read the account that West gave to the FBI. I mean, he details out, everything that happened up to the escape, even to the point of where they were supposed to be going. And I was like, if everybody in the prison, which was rooting for these men, knew that West had turned them in to the FBI and basically told them where to go look for him at, go north. I said, what would y'all have done to West? He said, he wouldn't have lasted 5 seconds in the yard. And he said, West told the FBI exactly what we told him to say.
Got it. Cool. He's got a little bit more. He's a character, this guy.
The next morning, that night, I knew they were really Monday night. So I stayed awake for a while, listening for any noise they would make going up through the walls. And if they made a noise, we'd be able to counter it by dropping a tin cup or making noise, covered their noise. Well, everything was pretty quiet all the way up till the lights went on at 9:30. And they left minutes after that. At 10:20, I didn't know this until 50 years later, what time it was. A big thump hit the roof when that cover on that air vent was dropped onto the roof. And I thought, oh, there goes the ball game. They're done. Sure enough, 5 seconds later, the telephone rang in the desk guard, and he answered it. And I found out later, years later, that it was a guard making a report that there's hearing noises up the roof. And he said, it's seagulls. Something, probably a cat or something disturbed the seagulls. And I said, well, another guard called 5 minutes later. It was a guard from the hospital. And he heard footsteps running across the roof. And they were so brainwashed in the fact that once we were locked up at night, after 9:30, lights were out, we were all in our cell, and the counts were made, and everything was accurate. They were safe. There was no trouble then until daylight.
What I have learned about
or they were just told, just look the other way.
I kind of agree with him. I believe that the guards got to the point where, they go around, they do the count, and they physically see everyone there. Because, they actually waited until that first count. So they go around, they do the count. You're locked in your cell. Where are you going?
Right.
So the guards pretty much, I agree, probably went, okay, we can relax a little bit. These guys aren't going anywhere. If there's going to be an escape, a break, one of the doors is going to be open and we're going to see it, So it's like we can relax a little bit. And I believe that's what they finally got to the point where they started relaxing, and that was their undoing.
Sure. Yeah. They were institutionalized just like the inmates. I mean, they show up there, they do their 8-hour shift or 12-hour shift where they kind of check off the boxes. Everyone forgets it's a job for them. So it's not like they're not going to go the extra mile. They're going to, they're just.
Well, I mean, why would you? If you were like Herman, and every single night for years, you walk down that, that corridor, and okay, I got my flashlight. I see everybody there. We just got through counting. We got, whatever the number was. They're not going anywhere. To him, he doesn't. The only way they could come out, according to what they were thinking, was through the gate or through the front door, right? I mean, of their cell. So he could see all all the cells shut. To them, they're going, I can understand you could probably be there at 2:00 in the morning and go, I don't really want to walk back down that corridor. I'll just say, they're all there. I haven't heard anything. No one's gotten out. Check my little box, like you said, Rob, and they started becoming lax. And you hear a noise. Oh, it's a cat. those are probably seagulls, being disturbed, or, they can easily write it off. So
not thinking that someone's burrowed through their cells and have climbed in through a shaft all the way to the top of the roof. It's not like the first thing you're thinking, because it's never been done before.
Well, and so think about the guard in the guard shack at the dock. One of the only manned towers. Do you really believe at 11 o'clock that night, when the boat was getting ready to leave, he was going to look over and see if anybody was being pulled by the boat? I mean, there's no telling how many nights he has sat there, and the same thing occurs every single night. The boat leaves at 11, goes over, picks somebody up, comes back, and so it becomes mundane to them. And besides, we all know, according to the FBI file, there was a baseball game going on that night. I can promise you, they not only did the inmates listen to the game, but so did the guards. He's probably sitting up there in his little comfort area in his tower, and he's listening to the game. He's not paying attention.
Yeah, I mean, how many times have you walked into and you saw a security guard basically looking on his phone or reading the newspaper, or when he's got monitors all over the place and he's not even paying attention to it, because you just keep on staring at the monitor, you get glazed over. So they were planning.
If he had looked over, he might would have seen them behind the boat. But
he does corroborate a couple of interesting pieces of information. One of them was he was aware that they were going that night. He was listening for the noise, and Whitey Bulger talks about the same thing. He was in his bunk, listening, waiting, very anxious, because if there was going to be any noise, he even talked about how they did make noise when they heard the thump on the roof. They started banging and, clinking and anything to distract the guards. And he also references the guard who was there at the time. He doesn't name him by name, but that was Herman the German, Charles Herman. Now he does differ in Herman's account because a couple of years ago, the Parks Department interviewed him, Charles Herman, about his years as a guard, and he does talk about the night of the escape because he was on duty that night. And according to Robert Schibline, that somebody called him, and I guess Schibline overheard the call because he seemed to know the details of the call about, hey, we heard something, and according to Schibline, that Herman sort of dismissed it, that he didn't think it was anything important, and it's seagulls, so don't worry about it. But according to Herman's account, and it's just a quick paragraph, and I'll read it. And this is how he said it went down that night. He says, after the treatment unit, the lieutenant wanted to go up to the hospital. He stayed up to the hospital till about 11:30, I guess it was. I made the count at 9:30. I heard a big plunk, and I know what that was. That was the boat. They had thrown the boat from the ceiling down there back of the kitchen, and when it hit the pavement, it made a big noise. So I said, are you going to call in, or am I going to call in? The gun gallery man who was there was young. He called out into the corridor and said, something's made a big racket out of the kitchen, and someone dropped the ball. Either the control man called the lieutenant, and the lieutenant didn't feel like going out. Anyway, if the lieutenant didn't feel like doing anything, then nothing was going to be done. Then they had escaped at 9:30, and there they were down at the water's edge, and they couldn't leave and get into the water till 10. So at that time, I had left a lot of things out. We used to have boats, and then he kind of deviates from the story. But he talks about making the call, saying, hey, we heard something. And he said the lieutenant didn't want to deal with it. He said, don't worry about it, even though they had heard something. So people heard things, and it's like, did Herman take the initiative, or did somebody call him, and did he sort of blow it off? So we have sort of conflicting stories there, but definitely there was something heard and nobody investigated.
But calls were made.
And whichever side of the phone they were being asked, both sides said, don't worry about it, essentially. Okay. And that's how the escape was allowed to happen, of course.
Cool. All right, let's see what else he has to say. He's got a little bit more.
I had my mirror out watching the guard come, and there was 4 guys down in the end of that cell tier. And I wanted to watch his reaction when he couldn't get him out of bed. And I was watching his, and he was in there hollering at one. And finally he hollered out at the lieutenant, and he says, I can't get him out of bed. And he says, I'll come down there and get him up. So he went stumping past my cell. I pulled my mirror in and made it like a mouse. And he went up there and he said, "Get out of that sack." And I heard him screaming. And he took his hand and he put it inside the bar and he slapped it down, open-handed down, and hit the pillow. And the pillow inflated and popped that head up in the air, and down onto the ground. And he jumped back about 6 feet, never touching the ground. I swear to God, he leaped back about 6 feet, and then he started grabbing for his whistle and blowing it, and that's when everybody in the cell block went nuts, screaming and howling and cheering and making a big racket. You could hear it in San Francisco. And they knew they'd made him out. They made it out. No, they didn't escape. They got out of their cells in the middle of the night, which is a phenomenal task right there, just all by itself. And they got off the island. We knew that because they were never found. And we know where they lost their boat. And but they never showed up. So in my mind, I know they're dead. But they have never found the body. But then Roland Cole left about 15 years before that. And they never found them. And they're only about 100 yards from where these guys left. And they never found their bodies either. But there's downdrafts. And Alvin Karpus was watching Roland Cole when they left. Because Doc Barker was watching also. And he was supposed to go. But he put it off. He said, only two will go this time. So Roland Cole were going to go. And the rest of the guys were watching. And as Roland came by there under the windows, he had this 5-gallon can for buoyancy. And all of a sudden he got sucked down. And 5 seconds later, the can popped up 15 feet out of the water, but he never did. And a minute later, Cole came by under the window and he got stuck down. So there's a downdraft from the current, and taking the water out of around the Alcatraz shows where the water would swirl and take up and down. And these guys were never found. The bodies were never found to this day. Now they say, well, there's 3 guys here. One of the bodies that's bullshit, because that water is not going to show anybody. They'll get stuck in those rocks and they'll be eaten by crabs before they ever be blown up to come up.
Yeah.
Well, I think he's mistaken.
I do too.
So, yeah, the only thing I will say is someone I was being interviewed this morning is that, people can say what they want to say about, that they didn't make it, couldn't, the water was too cold, whatever the argument is. But the only thing I'll say is every single year, 2,000 people swim it, from the island to the mainland. Some of them, when I said this to this individual, he was like, well, yeah, but, you have wetsuits. And I was like, well, no, there were several people on the boat that didn't have wetsuits. And all they had was, a regular bathing suit. And I said, also there were there were a group of people that were paraplegic, and one guy only had one arm. He swam. There was a guy who was blind that had a guide, and he swam. So this notion that you can't swim it, even if you had to swim it, is just a bunch of bull.
And then you have your uncles were kind of superior swimmers.
They were excellent swimmers.
They were superior.
Right.
I mean, I remember seeing that one photograph of, I don't know whose back it was, standing outside the car. He wasn't wearing a shirt. I mean,
That was John.
He built like a swimmer.
Yes.
Built like he was ripped.
And all of I keep going back to, I disagree with him that of all the people that commit suicide off of San Francisco, they find a good bit of it.
Oh yeah.
Not every single one of them,
They find a lot though.
Yeah, they find a lot. But that night, 3 men, and you're telling me that all 3 men drowned and you couldn't find one of them. And all of the evidence that they did find really kind of backs up and supports our story that they made it, because the life preserver, like I said, the one that they found, they were able to blow it up and it held air for a long time with weights on it. So why in the world would you take your perfectly good vest off if you were in the water struggling, that all you had to do was blow into it and keep air into it? and keep yourself afloat. I mean, it makes no sense, right?
Yeah.
It just blows my mind as to how people never really kind of gave them a chance because of the water, the sharks, and the tide. But yet, every single year people do it. And I guarantee you, they were people
without life preservers, by the way.
Without life preservers. You're exactly right.
You know, so if these guys had life preservers on and they're extraordinary swimmers, if they had to swim it, they would have swam it,
yes.
you know?
Yes.
And there was actually an inmate who, this was after their escape. It was in 1963 before the prison closed, or I'm sorry, I think it was December of 62. He actually swam. He made it all the way to the bottom of the Golden Gate Bridge. But he was suffering from hypothermia and he was exhausted, and they picked him up, there, but he had actually made it across the bay and he actually landed on land. Where he was picked up. So an inmate who had limited ability to train and get used to the cold water did make it.
Wow. Yeah.
Not long after the Alcatraz.
And probably didn't have the kind of, clothing that, with that they made, to make kind of like themselves like a little wetsuit.
Right.
And I've actually read the short FBI files that they did on Roe and Cole. And believe it or not, there was documents in there that suggested that the two men had made it all the way to Argentina. That they were actually in Argentina. So, this notion that they didn't make it either, and they found no bodies, and there are reports that they actually did make it.
Well,
it doesn't sound to me like this guy that we just listened to understood your uncles and how they could swim and how they wouldn't have just dumped their life preservers. I mean, none of that makes sense. If all the proof that we have found, you have found, suggests that they did make it. But again, from his perspective,
when you talk about proof, to me, the biggest proof is the photo. I mean, no one has been able to disqualify that photo yet. Every company that has looked at that photo, from the U.S. Marshals to the FBI to the company that looked at it in 2022, every single one of them comes back with a match. So how could they have drowned if that's them in that photograph?
Yeah.
Impossible. So,
no, and they started trolling the waters pretty soon after they discovered. So they would have found if they were like they have a life preserver on and they died of hypothermia, they would have found them.
Yeah,
they would have found them floating around.
Well, one of the things that we've talked about in previous episodes was the raft that was found on Angel Island.
Yeah,
and when because they got there the next morning, Officer Fish, and he describes the other guy's name as Olaf. And they just said, go in the water and start looking for them. We don't know where they are. Just start looking. And so they get on the boat and they start trolling around. And Olaf, he was Swedish and he had a background as a fisherman and he understood the tides. He knew how they worked from Sweden and, later in San Francisco Bay. And he estimated where the boat, if there was a boat, where would it be? And he figured it would be on Angel Island because the tide went out and then it brought the boat back in and it would have landed on the beach. And then that's exactly where they found the boat. So if there were bodies floating in the water, they would have been in the vicinity of the boat and they would have been washed or brought back in to the middle of the bay where Angel Island is, maybe not on the beach, but floating around there somewhere.
Yeah.
And they weren't there.
And two, so they found one life vest, but there were three men.
Yeah.
So John and Clarence, but let's assume that life vest was Frank Morris's. Well, John and Clarence had life vests. Where are those?
Right.
Exactly.
If
those wouldn't have sunk.
Right, exactly. So they would have still, and something that always caught my eye about the one that they found, I don't know how they come to the conclusion that it was Frank Morris's, but it was still tied in the back. So the way you would put it on, it would go over your head. It had a rope or a belt that went around your waist, and then you would tie it in the back. Well, it was still tied. So how would you come out of that if you died?
Right.
You know, if you physically died, how would you come out of that?
Yeah.
I don't think you could.
No.
I don't
The
think
only way that you could have come out of it, even if you were drowning, is that you had to take it off.
Yeah.
You had to physically take it over your head. So whoever that belonged to took it off of their body. So I find it so hard to believe that you're in the process of drowning and you're going to take off your life preserver. That doesn't even make any sense.
No. Nobody was giving up at that point.
No.
No, and then later in the FBI report, they do talk about how John had talked with other inmates about intentionally throwing these things in the water to make it look like they drowned. So they had pre-designed that into their escape plan. The oar, the raft, and the life preservers were intentionally thrown in the water so they would give up the search and then they'd, be able to escape. So we can account for that.
Yep.
And that's in the FBI report.
Yep.
There you go. The FBI
So
report.
next week, I would like to I have an audio recording of Cliff Fish as he was interviewed. And he was the guard who found the raft on Angel Island.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
and we can go through the exact same thing and listen, because a lot of the things that he says and describes in his account of finding the raft really is backed up by Whitey Bulger and also Officer Herman, because of him saying, they found the raft that night or that next day. So, that and then the fact that they actually, when they found the raft, they didn't put it into their boat, they pulled it. So, which means that the raft had the capability to be pulled.
Yeah.
So that tells you right off the bat that raft wasn't just a regular raft that you couldn't tie to. It had the ability with an eye at the front of it.
Yeah.
We know that was in the Popular Mechanics book that they found in Frank Morris's cell. That's what they were going to build on the front of that raft. Why would you need an eye? Why would you want that raft to be able to be pulled?
Yeah. Well, look forward to hearing that next week.
That's exciting.
So tune in, people. And so once again, guys,
thank you so much.
I always feel like I know everything, and I don't.
No, we don't. There's always more.
It's deep. It's so friggin' deep.
That's great.
Deeper than the San Francisco Bay, I would say.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
All right, guys. Talk to you next week.